Hello, mathematicians. How are you today? Today we're going to be continuing with our decimals, unit, and fraction. This is going to be lesson number 8. Today we're going to be investigating decimal numbers on the place value chart and expressing it in different units by understanding fraction equivalence. And what this means is we're going to be making connections between fraction equivalents and decimals, and we're going to be using a place value chart to deepen our understanding of this. So I want to remind you to refer to your vocabulary sheets that is attached to your attached in your math tools. Okay. We're going to watch a video that's going to help you to make this connection between the decimals, the fraction equivalency and decimals, and using place value chart for this.
So let's start with 2.3. Now, what does 2.3 mean? So if we were going to shade in 2.3, we would say, okay, well, here's one hole, and we got to shade that in. And then I know I need another one of those. So I'm going to shade that in, and that's going to go right here. So now I have two holes, right? And then but how are we going to do this 0.3? Well, the idea is I'm going to take this last one and I'm going to cut it into 10 strips. So I'm going to kind of zoom in a little bit and I'm going to cut that into 10 strips. So I'm going to begin by cutting it in half, and then I'm going to cut each half into 5 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then so there are my tenths. So I'm going to zoom back out so we could see it. So there's my tenths, and I know that I need to shade in 3 of those, and so that's going to be 1, 2, and 3. So there is my 2.3, right? So the idea is, let's start there. Now, if I wanted this entire thing in terms of tenths, well, I know I have 3 tenths, but how many tenths do I have right here? Well, I have 10 tenths. I have 10 tenths because really, if you remember, I could cut this into 10 strips and 3, 4, 5, and then I could cut this one into 10 strips. Oops, I lost track. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so there's another 10 tenths. Plus I have another 3 tenths. So what do I have to all together? I could think of this as 23 tenths, couldn't I? Now, if I wanted to, I could think about it in terms of hundredths as well, because I know I'm going to use red. And I'm going to zoom in. And if I wanted to think about this as hundredths, I would say, all right, well, let's cut this guy. Each tenth, I'll cut into 10 pieces. So I'm going to create hundredths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I just created hundredths here, and I'm going to do the same thing right here. So I'm going to cut it, first I'm going to cut it in half, and then I'm going to cut each half into 5 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to cut this into hundredths. So I'm going to start by cutting it in half, and then each half I'm going to cut into 5 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then so what I end up seeing is, now if we're thinking about hundredths, I could think about that as 100 hundredths plus another 100 hundredths, plus now I have 30 hundredths, so that equals 230 hundredths. All right, so we can think about these connections that, let's see, 2.3, I can think of that as 2 and 3 tenths. and I can think of that as 23 tenths. Or I could think of 2.3 as 2 and 30 hundredths, because really, if you think about it, all these little these what used to be 3 strips is now actually 30 little squares, and so I could think of this as 2 and 30 hundredths, which is equal to 230 hundredths. So we're making these connections, these equivalencies between the decimals, the fractions, and our I guess improper fraction, but I don't want to call it improper fraction. I'm just saying 23 tenths. Now, parents and teachers, why are we learning this? Well, eventually students are going to be adding and subtracting, which means they're going to be carrying and borrowing, essentially, using old terminology. And so we want students to be able to think about in terms of this, in terms of, oh, I need to carry or I need to borrow. So that's why it's going to be worth the effort to do this lesson and have our students really understand it. So here, using the area model, we're going to represent 220 hundredths. So what does that mean? Well, that means we're going to cut each of these into hundredths. There's hundredths. And then I'm going to do this one into hundredths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to also do this one as well. So cut it in half, and then cut each half into 5 pieces. That gives me 10 strips, so that now I have hundredths. So I have everything in hundredths. And if I wanted to shade in 220 hundredths, what would I be shading in? Well, I'm going to be shading in this entire 100 right here, so that's 100, plus I'm going to shade in another entire 100, so that's 200 total. And then, because I only want to shade in 20 more, that means I'm going to shade in 2 strips. Whoa, I'm going to shade in 2 strips. So that's going to be right here. So now, what did I just shade in total? How many tenths did I shade in? Well, I shaded in 10 tenths here, because now I'm talking about strips, going up and down, strips. And then I shaded in another 10 tenths over here, plus I shaded in 2 tenths here. So I shaded in 22 tenths, which is really 2 ones and 2 tenths, which is really 2.2. One whole, so there's 2 and 2 tenths. All right, so that's how we can think about using the area model to make our connections. Another way we could think about this is you could say, well, 220 hundredths is really, if we want to think about fractions, we could say, well, that's 100 hundredths plus another 100 hundredths plus 20 hundredths. And so that's the same thing as 1 whole plus 1 whole plus, and then we can say, well, we could say that's 20 hundredths, and that's equal to 2 and 20 hundredths. But we learned that you're allowed to divide both the numerator and the denominator by 10 in a previous lesson.